Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Amanda Kramer, and I am the Alumni Engagement Program Manager at the University of Colorado Boulder's Leeds School of Business. Welcome back to another COVID-19 webinar series. These are certainly trying times, and here at CU Boulder, we have gathered our world-renowned faculty and alumni to provide frank and timely insights for life during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Today is the third of 4 webinars in this COVID-19 related webinar series. To view upcoming webinars, please visit our website at colorado.edu/business/alumni. Click the drop-down arrow and click Attend Online Webinars. For today's webinar, we're so excited to welcome the President and CEO of TEGNA Inc. and CU Boulder alumnus, Dave Lougee, here presenting the business of journalism, keeping communities and employees informed and safe during times of crisis. A few housekeeping items before we begin. First, if you have any questions now or during the presentation that you would like to ask Dave, please send a question through the Q&A interface. We will monitor questions as they are submitted, and Dave will respond to them at the end of the presentation. As a reminder, for optimum audio quality, we do have everyone on mute except for myself and our speaker. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please notify us through the chat interface and one of our support specialists will touch base. Lastly, a link to access the webinar recording will be sent to all registrants tomorrow, along with the survey link and supplemental resources from today's presentation. Now, I am excited to introduce today's speaker. Dave Lougee is President and CEO of TEGNA Inc., one of the most geographically diverse broadcasters in the U.S. He also serves on the company's board of directors and serves on the board of directors for BMI and the Broadcasters Foundation of America. Prior to becoming CEO, Dave spent 10 years as president of TEGNA Media. During that time, the company acquired Bellow Corp and London Broadcasting, nearly doubling its broadcast portfolio. Earlier in his career, Dave was vice president, news director at TEGNA's KUSA in Denver. Dave is the immediate past chairman of the NBC Affiliates Board and is a past chairman of the National Association of Broadcasters and Television Bureau of Advertising Board of Directors. Dave graduated with a degree in English from the University of Colorado Boulder and attended the Stanford Executive Program at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. He also serves on the advisory board for CU Boulder's College of Media, Communication, and Information, as well as on the University of Colorado Foundation's Board of Trustees. He and his wife, Danny, reside in Northern Virginia. Their son, Nash, is a rising sophomore at CU Boulder. Welcome, Dave, and thank you so much for being here. I'm going to hand the webinar controls over to you now.
Thank you, Amanda, very much. And hello to all my fellow alumni from across the country and wherever you're sheltered in place, I assume. And I hope some students as well. So it's an honor to be able to do this. I'm a loyal CU alumni, and well, I grew up in Connecticut. I spent 20 years in Colorado and started my career there. And if all things had been perfect, I probably never would have left. So anyway, it's an honor to do this today. I'm going to try to keep my remarks to I hope and promise, just 20 minutes, let's say, because it's really about the Q&A part. So I will just talk a little bit about our company and touch the treetops on some of the issues around COVID that we've been dealing with recently and the George Floyd and systemic racism topic in America, because we're actually, as I'll mention in a moment, in the markets where most of the tension and debate has been taking place in this country. So with that, I'll get started. Just talk about ourselves a little bit. We'll pat ourselves a little bit on the back, but we're an innovative local media company you've probably never heard of because we're the former broadcasting division of Gannett, the newspaper division, and we spun that company out a few years ago, and we're now actually much larger than Gannett was at the time as a broadcast company. We're listed on the New York Stock Exchange. We own 62 TV stations in 51 markets, reaching approximately 39% of all people in the United States and households. We are the largest owner and distributor of NBC, including KUSA in Denver. And we are the largest owner of Big Four affiliates in the top 25 American cities. And by Big Four, I mean affiliated with one of the 4 major networks, NBC, ABC, CBS, and Fox. We have approximately 6,700 employees, and our stations are, as Amanda said, very diverse. We're located in major metropolitan areas like Washington, D.C. in the east, and Seattle in the other Washington in the west, and in smaller cities from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon. We're also in 87% of Texas. At TEGNA, we're driven by our core purpose to serve the greater good of our communities, and that's not some corporate catchphrase. Almost half of our employees are trained journalists. That came from them. And almost all of our employees can play that purpose back to you if you ask. Our goal is transforming local journalism in the digital age, innovating new ways to provide our audiences with the highest quality and relevant local news content via our TV, digital, and social platforms, and to protect and evolve the business model of local TV journalism. And as newspapers decline and go away, that's a goal more important now than ever. You know, we help change lives and change laws through our investigative reporting. As newspapers have been dying in our communities, we've been investing more in investigative journalism, more than we ever have before. And I say this not to pat ourselves on the back, but just to give you a sense of the level of investment and how important it is to us. We have won more national awards for investigative reporting in the last 3 years than any local media company in broadcasting or newspaper business. And frankly, we think more than any national company other than the New York Times. Again, not a very well-known fact because our TEGNA name is not well-known, but that's just to give you a sense of who we are. And a core reason for our success has been the resources we've invested to create a culture of innovation and inclusion throughout TEGNA. Again, I don't mean those as corporate catchphrases. We really mean it. It became clear to us and my peers in the senior management team that my age group and demographic was not going to be the one to come up with the answers on how to innovate this company on a number of various topics. So we have really reached into the ranks amongst our many talented people to empower them. We empower our news teams to do things differently, to challenge the status quo. Those of you in Colorado maybe have seen Next with Kyle Clark at 6 o'clock, whether you like it or not, you can let me know in the Q&A, but I think you'll agree it's different. And we're all striving to improve how we produce and deliver content to our consumers. And for us, innovation doesn't occur in a vacuum. It's a rigorous process of trial and error that is integrated throughout our company. You know, several times per year, pre-COVID, we'd physically gather a very diverse group of creative thinkers across our company for innovation summits, as we call them, where cross-section employees conceive and develop new and bold projects. We've done 13 of those summits over the past 3 years, inviting more than 450 innovators from across the field. These summits have led to the creation of 96 pilots and 23 green-lighted projects. One of these projects, which we call Verify, ended up being of critical asset to help us, has been a critical asset in helping us fight the spread of misinformation during COVID-19 and the more recent nationwide protests, and I'll discuss that in a little bit more detail later. And this culture of innovation never saw this coming, like none of us saw COVID-19, but this culture of innovation has turned out to be a blessing and incredibly invaluable for our company in dealing with COVID-19. So speaking to COVID, as it related to our initial response, once it became clear that this was going to have a seismic effect on all of our work and our lives, you know, we, frankly, being pretty ahead of the curve on technology, we're in a position to adapt very quickly to the new normal of remote work. And running a television station remotely is not like running, you know, a financial services company. We were faced with the complexity of operating 49 newsrooms across 27 states, with each location affected differently by the pandemic, as well as different state and local government rules and regulations at the time, which continue, as you know, to be changing by the day. And we do have very big positions in Texas, Florida, Georgia, and Arizona, the current hotspots. And as soon as we realized the magnitude of the pandemic, and I'd call that mid-March, we had two priorities. First and foremost, to ensure the safety of our employees and do our utmost to be sure their exposure was minimized. And second, to do everything we could to support our communities. And frankly, local news maybe never became more important than it did, especially during the early days of COVID. And that was reflected in very high audience numbers that we had at the time. Our news production and technology teams worked around the clock to create solutions that would enable us to broadcast a news program with as few as maybe only 1 or 2 people physically in the studio. In the span of a few days, our stations were able to, as you now see commonly across the country where people are anchoring and editing from home, we were among the very first to do that in just a matter of days and produce entire shows from people's homes. It's an amazing feat that would not have been possible, without high-speed broadband that was not so ubiquitous 5 years ago, but also that innovation I talked about in the entrepreneurial get-it-done mentality of our teams. But because we still needed some staff physically present in our buildings, and our reporters and photojournalists obviously still needed to be in the field, even pre-George Floyd, our next challenge was how to minimize the risk of infection. Each of our stations, working with our central corporate COVID-19 task force, developed detailed safety protocols for our news and technology teams. Some of those examples include, for our crews in the field, reporters and photojournalists were paired into teams so that they'd be working almost exclusively with the same person to limit contact. In-person interviews were not allowed indoors whatsoever. They were not allowed to go indoors to shoot governors' news conferences. They had to be done on the internet. And those interviews that were done outdoors using boom microphones from a distance, like you may have seen, with face coverings and obviously practicing appropriate social distancing. We are very concerned about protecting our field crews. And for employees who did have to physically be in a building, we established clear guidelines right away for who can be in the office and at what times, and where they are and are not allowed to go, what entrances and exits they must use, and even which restrooms they could use. And we did not leave it up to people on whether they could go to the building. You had to be authorized to go in any of our buildings, and still do, because our real issue is protecting those people who do have to go to our buildings. And the less people that go in, obviously, the lower the risk. And we obviously set up a lot of procedures to clean and disinfect everything. So I can take more questions on that later if people are interested, but that's not as unique to our business other than the production issues. But I'm incredibly proud of the way our entire company responded and is still responding, and how quickly we were able to adapt to this new reality. And I can take questions later on the business side, how we were able to successfully operate our sales organizations and finance and other operations as well without ever going into the buildings. Now, in terms of covering the story of COVID-19, I'd like to discuss our approach. From the moment we began covering COVID-19, our approach was very simple: facts, not fear. We were very aware of national news outlets on cable TV and other platforms that were purposefully playing on people's fear and anxieties, because that does work, frankly, in terms of getting ratings. But we saw during Ebola, when we had exactly the same program, how people who are at home, retirees especially, that don't have as much outside exposure, can be led to believe they're surrounded by fears that are not there necessarily. So we want to do just the opposite, providing facts, context, and a calming voice. We knew our audience was being bombarded with data and information. We also knew they were being exposed to misinformation, a lot of it, not just on social media, but frankly from news conferences and nation's capital. And that stuff spreads like a virus on social media. So I'd like to play for you a very short video, and I apologize in advance. It's a little bit of a breakup in our internet connection here on the playing of the video, but just to give you a sense, here's a short video from our station in Sacramento at the beginning of the outbreak that underscores the approach our stations have been taking.
We've all seen what's happening with coronavirus. Will I get it? You get it. Is it like a plague headed our way? We have fear. When we act on it, and only it, we tend to overreact and underprepare. Fear. As we move forward with our coverage at ABC 10, we could decide to play on our fears and yours. There's lots we don't know. We're avoiding giving you stories with no perspective. We could decide to do what local news has been known to do upon occasion: scare you with clickable headlines, designed more to frighten than inform. We could easily do all of that. But right now, we want you to know, fear cannot and will not be our goal. We can tell you that 80% of coronavirus cases are mild. Many patients bounce back quickly. If you're a reasonably healthy person with a strong immune system, you should be okay. We are seeking experts to ask informed questions, expect reasoned answers, and question those in power when need be. We will not guess or speculate or assume. At least that's not our goal. Should you see us doing that, let us know. Should you not get an answer you need, let us know. We will not get better unless you let us know and admit when we fail. Where this is going, we don't know. But that does not preclude us from having a say in where we go from here. Fear. It may be part of who we all are, but if it's the fear of the unknown that frightens us most, why not start by reporting on nothing less and nothing more than what we do know?
And obviously, this has been a story from the beginning where, frankly, what the facts are have been challenging because leave aside the weaponizing in politics on this story, just the science itself, obviously, of a virus in the early stage. There have been a lot of different thoughts and facts. And so it's been clear that our job obviously wasn't just to report the news. It was doing it in a way that didn't downplay negative facts, but also clearly didn't add to what was already a very high level of fear and uncertainty that we're all experiencing. So that's why we made it our mission to ensure data was reported with proper context, because there's been a lot of misuse of data, and using experts to help explain medical and scientific information in a way that was easily comprehended and well thought through. We also knew it was our duty to be an antidote to the spread of misinformation that is obviously such a new problem in this country. And that had the potential to cause even more harm than people were already feeling. And we had a team equipped to do just that. As I mentioned earlier, several years ago, we launched Verify, a fact-checking initiative that originated from one of those innovation summits I spoke to you. And frankly, prior to the Trump administration and prior to what we believe is a very unfortunate weaponizing of the term fake news. With Verify, viewers send in their questions, things they've seen on the internet or on cable news or wherever, for our team to authenticate true or false, yes or no, and then produce fully researched and transparent responses, showing our data either backing up or disproving a specific claim. Here's Jason Puckett from our national Verify team, or all of our stations have their own teams, to explain our approach during COVID.
Hi, I'm Jason, and this is Verify. We're a team of fact checkers backed by a national network of more than 50 local news stations. We investigate your questions about viral internet posts. What's true, what's false, and what needs more context to explain when it's a little bit of both. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we're focusing on facts, not fear, making sure we know what's really happening and not just driving up clicks and views. So if you want to make sure you're up to date on the latest COVID-19 facts, subscribe and click that bell icon to turn on notifications so you don't miss an upload. And if you see anything you want us to verify, tweet us or send an email to verify@tegna.com.
So we get hundreds of requests a day from viewers for things to be verified. And during COVID, as you might explain, there's been an exponential increase in those requests. Another way we've been able to connect directly with our audiences and get their feedback and their concerns has been through user-generated content, or UGC as the acronym is known in our industry. Since the pandemic started, we've been getting thousands and tens of thousands of texts per day across our properties, allowing us to connect on a personal level and build a deeper trust with our audience. Here's an example from our Tampa station, WTSP.
Of course, the concern really is fixated here in our area, and parents want to know, are their kids going to be okay, and how do they best protect them and keep them healthy?
Yeah, that's a natural concern, and I've already talked to some parents who are very concerned about that.
So thanks to the ingenuity of our news teams, we're helping keep our communities informed and safe by interacting, communicating with them like never before across all platforms. Now let me turn to what we call George Floyd, because we have a very big station in Minneapolis, and so we've been living with this story from the very beginning. And obviously, it affected everybody not just everybody in Minneapolis, but everybody in our company, just like it's affected really everyone in America. So it really became a second national crisis for us. And frankly, the killing of George Floyd, captured on video for all of us to see, was a brutal reminder and painful that our country still has a long ways to go in terms of, racial, social justice, and frankly, fighting systemic racism that we all know is alive and well. And just as COVID posed unique challenges for our business, so did the nationwide demonstrations that followed in the aftermath of his death, because frankly, there were violent demonstrations in the evenings in some of our markets, certainly in Minneapolis, certainly in places like Seattle and Louisville. At one point, our staff on a Saturday night had to hide in the basement. But that was misrepresentative. as we knew, of the majority of the protests, especially during the daytime, which were often very different protests, that were a cross-section, a rainbow of this country like nothing I've seen in my lifetime, and nothing, frankly, nothing like the riots of 1968 when I was a 10-year-old. We felt it very important that we contextually show and not play to the dogma and stereotyping that these were, monolithic types of protests. Like I said, we have a very strong station in Minneapolis. We also have big stations in many of those largest cities where the largest protests were happening, including DC, Atlanta, Louisville, as I mentioned, Seattle, and Portland, Oregon. So in these markets, our employees were now subject to the dual stresses of living with COVID while also having to report on the protest. I mean, think about it. We had crews out there in the evening with their masks on, right, that were in the middle of, hell in some cases, also worried about getting the coronavirus. And we were laser focused on their safety. One thing I'll point out we did, none of our crews went out without actually individual security. We hired security companies, which were very hard to get at the time, and none of our crews went into those situations without somebody, almost without, in every case, without an unarmed security person to help them out. So these additional, pressures on a lot of our employees was something our leaders and managers, had to be very aware and sensitive to as we were making decisions about how to cover the protest and keep our employees safe. To better inform our coverage, we instituted practices to make sure diverse perspectives were heard inside our newsrooms during editorial meetings and on our broadcast. And as with our coverage of COVID, like I said, the safety of our employees was paramount. So I'm happy to say we were very successful. There were a couple of small incidents that were pretty scary, but overall we did pretty well. We also have a number of initiatives now that are not going to be short-term to fight systemic racism in the markets we're in the long term. And I'd be glad to go into more details on that during the Q&A period if anyone would like to ask us about those. During this time, we also introduced a new feature on our station's mobile apps called Near Me. This feature allows users to see hyperlocal news from our stations and content submitted by users geotagged down to the neighborhood and street level. And this proved to be extremely useful during the protest. In addition to covering the protests, many of our stations are using their platforms to help our communities come together and move forward, because that's something great that a broadcast station can do, which is really make people on different parts of a community who would otherwise never interact understand each other better. And I'm very proud of the storytelling and the way many of our properties do that. They've been convening and facilitating important discussions about race and equality, having honest conversations. And frankly, this week, for instance, our station in New Orleans is airing a 1-hour special called, quote unquote, The Talk, referring to the awful talk that African-American and Hispanic parents have to have with their kids before just letting their kid drive to the grocery store. Lessons learned from all this, from a leadership standpoint. Through our experiences over these last few months, there are several important lessons learned that I'd like to share before I take your questions. Number one of the things that was made most clear to us is that a crisis is not the time to hang on to and compartmentalize information. It is a time for over-communicating with all of your constituents, like our audiences, but in our case, especially our employees. We've never had a need to be more transparent because they're facing all of the stresses. When the COVID-19 pandemic began, our employees were already concerned for their own physical and economic well-being for them and their loved ones. So we've done our best to ensure that we don't add to that stress levels by clearly communicating what we're doing to keep them safe and keep our business strong. And I'll also tell you what's become crystal clear is that as the public at large has become less trustful of their government leaders and not finding the stability and leadership they want from them, there's a lot of pressure on company CEOs to fill that void. And it is not lost on our management team nor me personally. So for instance, in the second quarter, we had a tremendous drop in revenue. As you can imagine, we're an advertising-based business. And in April, it fell off a cliff. But we didn't lay a single person off. And again, through communication and transparency, I spoke to the employees about the goal here. We decided everybody was going to do a shared sacrifice economically in the months of April, May, and June so that we could try to protect as many jobs as possible. And frankly, we've laid nobody off to date due to COVID-19. So very quickly in that quarter, every TEGNA employee either took a 1 week unpaid furlough, although they kept their medical benefits, or if they couldn't take a furlough, it was an 8% pay cut for the quarter, which represents 2% pay cut for the year. And then myself, and my senior management team took a 20% pay cut during that time, and I took a 25% pay cut. It was very well received. They understood it was for the common good of protecting their employees and protecting their coworkers. And they also knew it would be tone deaf to complain about it when, you know, tens of millions of people in our own markets were losing their jobs. And again, but I don't think it would have been going as well if we weren't very clear about how we communicated. We've been doing regular updates on many things weekly, and we've made sure everybody knows the resources are available to help them cope and work during the pandemic, especially mental health resources that we've really upgraded and made available to them during this. And we've made our employees know we understand the stress they're feeling, and it's okay to not be okay with everything that's happening. Managers made it clear that each of us ourselves, as I've said, are coping with COVID in our own ways, and that we would do their utmost to support their terms team times. You know, here's just a couple of clips from some video messages I sent to the employees, probably three examples from over 3 different weeks. You know, I note I start out in my office and then I'm at home, but just to show you what we're trying to do with employees in terms of being transparent.
I wanted to talk to you today just to acknowledge what unprecedented times we're in, which is obvious, but to also acknowledge the anxiety, the uncertainty, the fear of the unknown that's kind of endemic to this disease that is creating anxiety in all of us. We all need to sort of understand with the future in mind that in the near term, there's going to be some unprecedented issues that we're all going to face, both in our jobs and in our professional lives. Let's just know that's coming and know that together, through innovation and kindness, we're going to figure it out. We're going to get through it together, and we'll come out of this stronger than ever.
And let me begin also by thanking all of you for your collective sacrifice. Thank you for all you've done together to keep our colleagues safe. Thank you to our news crews in the field, to our first responders in my book. At a time when Americans need facts, not fear, we should feel some collective gratitude. Gratitude that we work in a profession where, due to technology and innovation, we don't have to be shut down like so many other people are facing in this country and businesses. And gratitude that we work in a profession with a purpose, with such an incredible ability to make such a difference in the lives of the people we serve.
And in the aftermath of George Floyd's death, we also tried to be honest with our employees and acknowledge that as a company, we had a lot of work to do ourselves. And here's a brief example of that. And after that, I'll wrap up.
We acknowledge that we have a lot more work to do in bringing greater inclusivity and representation to key positions across the organization, including key editorial roles. We will be pulling together a group of employees of color from a cross-section of the company for a bottom-up, real talk analysis of how we need to change.
All right, so Demetrius and maybe Amanda, if you can come back to me, I would just wrap up by saying that, you know, a key part of leadership through all this, I'm going to skip the last few bullets of Demetrius just in the spirit of time. The key issue is communication, I would say, the number one, and humility, right? Nobody has all the answers during this situation. Right now, as we sit here today, our employees a tremendous number of our employees are facing this great stress and uncertainty about, you know, their own children going back to school, whether it's, you know, kindergarten or, you know, CU Boulder, right? And that creates uncertainty about, am I going to have to go back to work at the office or the TV station? And we've never faced, you know, more situations where we don't have the answers always. And frankly, just telling them we don't have the answers, but we're working on them. Here's the criteria we're using. And I think people are looking for communication, and they respect an answer of "I don't know." And I think we've had to get better at saying we don't know, but here's how we're thinking about it. Here's the different data points we're using to make those decisions. And I think you know, I'm very proud of our senior leadership team on how we've helped our people through this. Got a lot of uncertainty ahead. And I think that's the other message I'd say is that leaders need to be comfortable in dealing and leading in a time of maximum uncertainty and ambiguity. And that's not always easy for leaders that want to have all the right answers. And with that, thanks for letting me share, and I'll shut up and turn it over to any questions that people might have.
Great. Thank you so much for that information, Dave. As a reminder, as we move into Q&A here, please feel free to submit your question through the Q&A interface, and we will ask Dave. The first question here comes from David. He asks, how do your assignment editors and news directors decide on what's news? How much do competition and ad dollars influence those decisions?
You know, competition is, there's an issue of definition of competition, right? I was a news director at KOSA in the 90s, and you might have looked up at 3 different monitors and looked at channels, what are they, 4, 7, you know, in Denver. And, but now the competition is really all forms of media. And in some ways that's a good thing, because then you're just focused on what's relevant to the viewers. We have much better tools today to know what people care about and what they're interested in. So there is a combination of what people want to know and what they should know. Right? I mean, not often getting a lot of questions about the local government, but that's where the job of the newsrooms is, to make sure people know what they need to know about the local government, but also what they want to know. So there's no one single recipe, but trust me when I say that, you know, we just don't look at what's trending at the top of Twitter and decide that's what's going to lead the newscast. But it would be bad journalism not to know what was trending on Twitter, because you need to know what people are thinking about.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next is just a piece of feedback from Kim. She wanted to let you know, speaking of Next with Kyle Clark, it is brilliant. Thank you for that feedback, Kim.
I'll tell Kyle you said that, Kim.
Next, we have a question from an anonymous attendee. You have mentioned that you are working on having the newsroom become more diverse. In what ways are TEGNA developing strategies to make sure their newsrooms are diverse?
Yeah, so the fundamental problem in the industry, which is no excuse at all, is that we have newsrooms that are mathematically diverse, but the real key is, where does decision-making and power lie? And it's not always by the title, right? Especially in our case, in our business, it's really those people that control editorial decisions that have the most influence over those. And we have a lot of work to do. And that's going to be, it's not as easy as pulling in people from the outside or stealing them from the competition, because the competition for talent is hard. We've got to, you know, create our own pipeline and develop people and move them up. We've actually made a lot of progress on sort of the middle rungs, getting people in the door to entry-level positions, let's say in the newsrooms, like producers, and now in executive producers and assistant news directors. But news directors, general managers, we've got a lot more work to go. We've actually probably had a lot more progress on Hispanic, in a census name, specifically Mexican-American background, Latino folks, you know, because we have a high presence in Texas, Arizona, Colorado, but we've not done nearly as well on the African-American front. And we have a lot of markets, very big markets, like Norfolk, Atlanta, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're in the process now of putting an accountability system in for those hires, and also who is in the hiring process. We are, like a lot of companies, considering a chief diversity officer, which is proven to be meaningless unless that job has authority and it survives CEOs. Often CEOs will be completely committed, and another CEO comes in and that momentum is lost. What we're doing at our company, and I'm working with our board of directors, is that on all of the committees of our board of directors, each of our 4 committees will have a piece of their charter that relates to the company's goal of removing systemic racism, including potentially even our audit committee in some financial ways and how we invest money in pension funds and things like that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next, we have a question from Chris. We're actually receiving this from a couple of attendees. Chris says, my daughter is a senior in CMCI, which for those not familiar, that's CU Boulder's College of Media, Communication, and Information. Chris asks, where do you see future career paths for her?
You know, I think if somebody, former English major, of course I'm going to say this, but I think if somebody's curious, very curious, intellectually curious, knows how to write and is a good storyteller, I think there will be good jobs out there. What exactly those career paths will be in 20 years, I don't know. Things have changed so much in the last 20, and there'll be the exponential amount of growth on that. So that's one of the things we're focused on right now is, as I talked about in my comments, we picked up the mantle from newspapers, right? Because that form of distribution has gone by the wayside. But I think in the digital world, we need more than national news outlets. We need healthy local news outlets given our form of democracy and what our founding fathers set up for us. But I think whatever that job is for your student when they come out 2 years from now, that may be a very different form of distribution 8 or 9 years from now. But if they're a good, hungry storyteller that's able to, tell their own story, and shoot their own video and be a self-contained storyteller, they should have very good options. And the best thing to do is get an internship. Right now, unfortunately, because of COVID, we did not do internships this summer, which I hated, because that's how most people get jobs in the business. That's how I got a job. I got an internship at the Denver TV station when I was in Boulder. I can't tell you exactly what the form of distribution will be, but I do believe there'll be good jobs for good storytellers that care.
Great, thank you. And next we have a question from Karen. She says, thank you so much for your time. Can you explain why so many local, national, and cable news say exactly the same verbiage about certain news items? I appreciate your insight.
Yeah, I don't think we do. I know there has been some companies and some national stories about that, and there may be another competing company that, might have been appropriately taken to task for reading the same stories. We don't do that. We have very high standards in our journalistic principles. We don't take a piece of, there was a situation a couple of months ago where a handful of TV stations around the country, none of ours, thank God, that were literally reading a Business Wire press release from Amazon. And, that's terrible. But we don't do that. And the answer is, why do people do it? Short staffing and a lack of constant training and ethics training that, you get young people come in, new producers, and somehow, that message isn't passed along. That'd be my best answer I can give that.
Great, thank you. We're moving into our final couple of questions now. The next question is from another anonymous attendee. It said, as CEO, who do you rely on for support and advice?
It's a great question. It's a little lonely sometimes, to be honest with you, as other CEOs will tell you. But I do have a bit of a kitchen cabinet of some muses, not necessarily in the company. Our board of directors is very good. I'm lucky to have a fantastic board chair who is one of the top officers at Dell EMC. He's a great mentor. But I've also got a few, there's a consulting company head, a couple of retired folks. So there are, and a couple of bankers that I really like their wisdom. So I do seek out a handful of people that I can trust to take into their confidence, because that especially as a public company CEO, there's a lot I just can't share, even with my own family, right? So it's a very good question. Appreciate it being asked.
Great. And then our final question today is from Valeria. She wonders, Dave, you've shared some leadership tips on this webinar. If you were to conclude and share with us just your best leadership advice in a couple of sentences, what would that be?
Can I take more than a couple sentences?
Yes.
Real quickly, I'll try to do a quick version of this one. Early on in my career, I was sent to a place called the Center for Creative Leadership, actually in Colorado Springs. And they did this exercise. Well, actually, let me start this way. On the first day, they had, in the first evening, it was 18 of us in the class, a week-long class, 16 men, 2 women, and they asked all of us just to talk a little bit about ourselves, who we were, and what our hobbies were. Try to make a long story short again. One of the 2 women, it was 16 type A men, 1 type A woman, and a type B woman. The type B woman said her hobby was wintertime camping. So filed that away. Fast forward to Thursday of that week, they put us through this exercise where they put us in a classroom and they give us a problem. The Sierra Club came up with a problem, and the problem specifically was, 5 men were hunting in the Colorado mountains outside of Aspen. They were in a station wagon 20 miles off the main road. They got stuck in a blizzard. They weren't going to be able to get out for a week. Here's 16 items in the vehicle. Rank them in order of importance to their survival. Okay? So you do that. You sit in a classroom. You do that by yourself. Then they broke us up into 3 groups of 6, right? And we solved it as a group. I'll try to get to the punchline fast. 2 massive lessons out of that. One, like they told us, like only once in 10,000 times when they've done that, did an individual come up with a better answer than the group. That was a profound lesson. Back to our innovation summits. And the second lesson was, thank God I wasn't in that group, in the group of 6 with a type B woman whose hobby was wintertime camping, and they videotaped all these, by the way, so you got to watch yourself afterwards. What's your guess about whether that woman was listened to by 5 type A men? And the answer was she wasn't. And by the way, she had by far better answers, obviously, than anybody in the group. So 2 main lessons, which was a group given a problem will always come up with a better solution than an individual. And 2, sometimes the best answers come from people that are the least self-promoters.
Great. That is a great place for us to end. And I want to say thank you so much to everyone for joining us for today's presentation. And thank you again to Dave for this great information. As a reminder, all webinar attendees will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording of this presentation. To view upcoming webinars as well as previous recordings, please visit our website at colorado.edu/business/alumni. We hope that you will join us for our next webinar, which is next Wednesday, July 22nd, as lead senior instructor and director of the Personal Financial Planner Program, Harry Starn, presents on personal financial planning during the COVID-19 crisis. In the meantime, have a great rest of your day and go Buffs.